Mark Turner arrived at the towering glass building of Windsor and Company as he had done every weekday for the past 25 years. The morning was unusually cold for London, with a bitter wind slicing through the city streets. His scarf flapped violently against his charcoal coat as he pushed open the heavy revolving door. The warm lobby swallowed him, but the chill in his bones remained. He adjusted his tie, a nervous habit, and crossed the marble floor toward the lifts, already ticking off the day's meetings in his mind. The elevator's ascent felt slower than usual. Mark caught a glimpse of his reflection in the mirrored walls. Silver hairs at his temples, fine lines carved by years of loyalty and late nights. He smiled faintly, unaware that today would be unlike any other. When he reached his floor, the receptionist looked up at him with a stiff, uncomfortable smile. She handed him a folded note with trembling fingers. Mark's heart sank as he took it, reading the brief message summoning him to Edward Windsor's office immediately. He knew something was wrong. Edward Windsor sat behind his imposing oak desk, his back to the room, gazing out over the misty London skyline. The office smelled of old wood and expensive cigars. Without turning, Edward spoke, his voice clipped and cold. "Mark, close the door." Mark closed it quietly, the soft click echoing like a gunshot in the tense silence. Edward finally turned, his expression devoid of warmth. His eyes, once full of camaraderie and ambition, were now hard and calculating. "I'll come straight to the point," he said. "We are restructuring the company. Your role is no longer required. Effective immediately." For a long moment, Mark just stood there, stunned. The words circled in his mind but refused to make sense. "After 25 years?" he croaked. "Without warning? Without dignity?" Edward's lips twisted into a mockery of a smile. "This is business, Mark. Loyalty does not pay the bills." Mark took a step forward, his fists clenching at his sides. "I gave everything to this firm," he said hoarsely. "I built this division. I brought in clients that made you rich." Edward leaned back, utterly unmoved. "And now you are obsolete," he said simply. Security arrived moments later, silent and efficient. They escorted Mark from the building without allowing him to collect his things. His name badge was taken, his access revoked, and by the time he stumbled onto the pavement, it was as if he had never existed within those gleaming walls. He stood there, numb, as the cold wind tore at his coat. The bustling city moved around him, indifferent. Mark stared up at the gleaming glass tower of Windsor and Company, his breath misting in the frigid air. His chest burned with humiliation and rage. His life's work had been erased with a few cold words. He walked away slowly, each step heavier than the last. But deep inside, something had shifted. The man they thought they had broken was still very much alive. And he was about to become the architect of their ruin. The days blurred together after Mark's dismissal. He roamed the city without purpose, a ghost among the living. London, with all its ancient streets and grand facades, now seemed cold and unfamiliar. His modest flat in Southwark became a prison of silence, the ticking clock mocking him with each second that passed. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Mark found himself rifling through old boxes in his study. He stumbled across dusty folders, forgotten memories of his early years at Windsor and Company. Contracts, project plans, emails printed on yellowing paper, evidence of the empire he had helped build. And then, tucked between two thick files, he found something far more interesting. It was a black notebook, leather-bound and worn at the edges. He frowned, unable to remember ever seeing it before. When he opened it, his hands trembled slightly. Inside were pages of handwritten notes. Names, dates, places, and numbers. Lots of numbers. As he read deeper, realization dawned on him with chilling clarity. These were not ordinary business records. They were accounts of secret deals, bribes paid to foreign officials, money quietly laundered through shadow companies. Some names he recognized instantly. High-profile politicians, corporate rivals, even a few journalists. Mark sat back in his chair, heart pounding. Edward Windsor had built more than a business empire. He had built a machine of corruption, greased by fear, loyalty, and vast sums of untraceable money. And Mark, without ever knowing, had been one of the cogs. The betrayal cut deeper than he could bear. 4 hours, Mark pored over the notebook, connecting the dots. The evidence was damning, detailed, and most importantly, irrefutable. Enough to bring Windsor and Company crashing down, taking Edward and all his accomplices with it. But if Mark acted, he would be placing himself in terrible danger. Edward was not the kind of man to forgive easily. Those tied to the notebook's secrets would go to any length to silence him. Mark closed the notebook slowly, feeling the weight of it in his hands. His world had already ended once. He had nothing left to lose. If Edward Windsor wanted to erase him from history, then Mark would return the favor, and he would do it with surgical precision. Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle. The city lights flickered in the puddles like broken stars. Mark stared out into the night, the black notebook clutched tightly in his hands. The game had changed. And this time, Mark Turner would not play by anyone else's rules. Mark spent the next few days studying every detail in the black notebook. He mapped out the connections, the shell companies, the hidden transactions. Every thread led back to Edward Windsor, but the web was vast and complicated, reaching into the highest levels of power. He knew he needed help. Going to the police was out of the question. If the corruption ran as deep as the notebook suggested, then any leak could get him killed before he even had a chance to speak. Instead, he turned to the only person he could trust. Sarah Knight. Sarah had been Mark's closest ally during his early days at Windsor and Company. A brilliant legal mind with a stubborn sense of justice, she had left the company years ago, disgusted by Edward's methods. They had lost touch, but Mark remembered her last words clearly. "If you ever find yourself drowning, call me." It took 2 days to track her down. She was working as a freelance legal consultant now, tucked away in a quiet part of Camden Town. When he knocked on her door, Sarah answered almost immediately. Her hair was shorter now, her expression sharper. But when she saw Mark, a flicker of old familiarity crossed her face. "You look terrible," she said bluntly. Mark gave a humorless smile. "You should see the other guy." Inside, over mugs of bitter coffee, Mark laid out everything. He showed her the notebook, explained how he found it, and detailed the risks they were facing. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face an unreadable mask. When he finished, there was a long silence. Finally she spoke. "You're insane for even touching this," she said. "But you were always stubborn." She tapped her fingers against the notebook thoughtfully. "If we do this," she continued slowly, "we do it properly. No grand reveals, no standing on rooftops shouting about justice. We tear them down piece by piece. Quietly. Thoroughly." Mark nodded, feeling a strange surge of hope. Sarah leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And we start by finding out who else knows about this. Because trust me, Mark, if you have it, someone else does too. And they'll be watching." A chill crept down Mark's spine. He hadn't considered that. Suddenly, a noise outside made them both freeze. A car door slammed. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path leading to the house. Sarah moved quickly, snapping off the lights and pulling Mark down behind the sofa. Through the crack in the curtains, they saw 2 men approaching. Dark suits, cold eyes, moving with professional precision. Sarah cursed under her breath. "They found you," she whispered. Mark's heart pounded in his ears as he clutched the notebook tightly. This was no longer a matter of if they would come for him. They already had. And the game had truly begun. Sarah's living room shrank into darkness as they pressed themselves closer to the floor. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs, every second stretching into eternity. The men outside moved with chilling efficiency. One circled around the back, the other approached the front door. A soft click echoed through the house, the sound of a lockpick at work. Sarah's hand gripped Mark's arm, steady but urgent. She pointed silently towards the kitchen at the back. An old service door, half hidden by coats, offered a slim chance of escape. Without a sound, they slipped across the floor. Every creak of the old wooden boards felt like a gunshot. Mark dared not breathe. Just as Sarah eased the back door open, a heavy knock shattered the silence. The front door. "Miss Knight," a voice called out. Polite. Measured. Deadly. "We just want to ask a few questions." "Open the door." Sarah didn't hesitate. She pulled Mark through the back door, and they sprinted into the alley behind her house. The chill night air hit Mark like a slap. The alley was narrow, lined with crumbling brick walls and overflowing rubbish bins. Behind them, they heard the front door being kicked in. "They're inside," Sarah hissed. They didn't stop running. Down the alley, across a deserted street, weaving through shadows. Their breath came in ragged gasps, footsteps echoing loudly on the wet pavement. A black car screeched into view at the end of the road, headlights cutting across the darkness. Sarah yanked Mark into a side street just in time, the car roaring past without spotting them. They kept moving, deeper into the maze of London's sleeping streets. Finally, when they were sure they weren't being followed, Sarah dragged him into an abandoned tube station entrance. Rusted gates barred the way, but Sarah slipped through a gap and pulled Mark after her. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of damp stone. Faded posters from decades past peeled from the walls. It felt like stepping into another world. A forgotten one. Only then did Sarah let herself breathe. Mark collapsed onto a bench, every muscle trembling. What the hell is happening?" he panted. Sarah crouched in front of him, her face deadly serious. "Whoever those men are," she said, "they're not just Windsor's attack dogs. This is bigger. Much bigger." She pulled a battered laptop from her backpack and powered it on, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "We need to go underground, Mark. No phones. No cards. No trace. From now on we're ghosts." Mark stared at her, the weight of it all finally crashing down. He had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. And the hunt had only just begun. Hours passed before Sarah spoke again. Her eyes were focused on the laptop screen, the glow from it casting eerie shadows on her face. Mark sat beside her, tension hanging thick in the air. "We can't stay here long," Sarah muttered, her voice low. "They'll find us. They always do." Mark nodded, but his mind was racing. The world outside felt like a distant dream, unreachable and out of focus. All he could think about was how close they'd come to being caught. "Sarah," he started, his voice shaking slightly, "I need to know. What's really going on? Who are these people? Why do they want you?" She hesitated for a moment, her fingers still dancing across the keyboard. She wasn't sure how much she could say, how much Mark would even believe. "These people." She paused again, taking a slow breath. "They've been after me for years. It started with a file I found at work. I thought it was just an old security breach, nothing important. But it was more than that. It was a trail to something much bigger, and I couldn't let it go." Mark leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What was it? What did you find?" Sarah's gaze flicked up to meet his. Her eyes were filled with both regret and determination. "I found the connection," she said quietly. "The missing link. It wasn't just about Windsor or his company. It was about something global. A network of influence that reached into governments, corporations, even intelligence agencies." Mark felt the weight of her words. He had been caught in something much darker than he had imagined. Before he could respond, the sound of a phone vibrating interrupted the silence. Sarah's eyes snapped to the device on the table, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. She reached for it with quick hands but paused just before picking it up. The number was unfamiliar, and it wasn't a call she was expecting. Without thinking, she answered. "Hello." A voice on the other end was calm, steady, but with an edge of urgency. "Sarah Knight," the voice said. "I know who you are, and I know what you're running from. If you want to stay alive, you need to listen carefully." Mark could see the tension flood Sarah's face as she gripped the phone tighter. Her knuckles turned white. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "You don't know me, but I'm an ally," the voice continued. "You've been digging into things that will get you killed. I've been watching you for a long time. I'm the one who tipped you off about the men at your door tonight." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She didn't trust easily, but something about this call felt different. "Who are you?" she demanded. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. The voice lowered to almost a whisper. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows how dangerous the people you're up against really are. And I'm someone who can help you take them down. But I need your trust, Sarah. Right now, that's the only thing I can offer." Mark shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Sarah and the phone. He could sense the gravity of the situation, but he still had so many questions. "I don't trust you," Sarah replied, her voice hard. "How do I know you're not just another part of their game?" Another pause, this one lasting longer. "Because if I wanted you dead," the voice said coldly, You wouldn't be alive to ask. It was enough to make Sarah reconsider. She glanced at Mark, who nodded, uncertain but willing to follow her lead. All right, Sarah said slowly. What's the plan? The voice gave a short, amused chuckle. Meet me at midnight, at the old docks by the river. Don't bring anyone else. And don't make a sound. The line went dead. The night was thick with fog as Sarah and Mark made their way to the docks. The moon was hidden behind clouds, casting the world in a dim, uncertain light. The usual hum of the city was distant, replaced by the eerie silence of the water lapping against the edges of the dock. Sarah's heart raced, the adrenaline from the call still pumping through her veins. She didn't trust this mysterious figure, but something told her that this was their only chance to get out of the web that was closing in around them. Are you sure about this? Mark asked, his voice tense as he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see shadows following them. I don't know, Sarah replied, her eyes scanning the fog ahead. But we don't have a choice. We need answers, and whoever they are, they might have them. The docks were deserted, the creaking of the wooden planks the only sound as they walked deeper into the mist. They reached a spot where the old warehouses loomed in the distance, their silhouettes barely visible against the dark sky. Sarah stopped and glanced around. We're early, she murmured. We should stay hidden until. Before she could finish, a faint figure appeared from the mist, moving silently but with purpose. Mark's hand instinctively went to the gun hidden beneath his jacket, but Sarah stopped him with a glance. The figure drew closer, and Sarah could finally make out the outline of a man. Tall, with a hood drawn low over his face. His movements were smooth, almost predatory. He didn't look like someone who was afraid of being followed. In fact, he seemed to expect it. Sarah Knight, the man said, his voice deep and calm, yet with an edge that made Sarah's pulse quicken. I'm glad you came. I wasn't sure you would. I don't trust you, Sarah said bluntly, crossing her arms. I don't even know who you are. The man smiled, though it was more a slight upturn of the corners of his mouth than a real grin. I understand. But we don't have much time, and I need you to listen carefully. He stepped closer, his eyes flicking briefly to Mark before focusing back on Sarah. I know what you've uncovered, he continued. And I know what's coming for you. The people who want you silenced, the ones behind Windsor, they're planning something bigger than you can imagine. You have no idea how far their influence stretches. Sarah's mind raced. The pieces she had been trying to put together all this time suddenly felt like they were about to fall into place. What do you mean? Who exactly are they? The man looked around cautiously before answering. They call themselves the Council. It's a network of powerful people, far beyond any corporation or government. They control things from the shadows, wars, financial systems, global policies. They've been manipulating everything for decades. Mark stepped forward, his brow furrowed. So Windsor's just a pawn? Not exactly, the man replied, shaking his head. Windsor's been a part of it all along. He's more like a broker. They trust him, but he's not the one running the show. Sarah felt a chill run through her. Who is then? The man hesitated, his gaze shifting momentarily to the water. I can't give you that information yet. But I can help you get closer. There's a way to bring them down, but you need to follow my instructions carefully. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but the man raised a hand, silencing her. You don't have a choice, he said, his tone firm. If you try to go against me now, you'll be dead before the week is out. You don't understand the danger you're in, but I do. And I can protect you, if you trust me. Mark looked at Sarah, his face filled with doubt. She was torn. Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right, that they were walking into even more danger than they were already in. But the man was right about one thing. They had no time left. If they wanted to survive, they had to act now. Finally, Sarah nodded, though with visible reluctance. All right. What do we do? The man's lips curled into a slight smile again, but this time it was more reassuring than before. Good. First, you need to get the file back. The one you found in Windsor's office. Why? Mark asked, his voice sharp. I thought you said Windsor wasn't the main player here. The man nodded. He's not. But that file. It contains the last piece of the puzzle. It holds the key to their entire operation. Without it, you can't fight them. Sarah's eyes locked on the man's, her mind already processing the next steps. She was terrified, but she knew they had no other option. The file was the only leverage they had. "We'll get it," Sarah said quietly. "But we'll need help. You said you were watching us. You've seen what Windsor's capable of. How do we even get close to that building again?" The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small device, a small, sleek gadget that looked like a portable hard drive. "This will help," he said. "It's a hacking tool that can disable the security systems. It'll give you a window of time to get in and out without being detected." Sarah took the device, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. "And you'll be there to help us if anything goes wrong?" The man gave her a cryptic look, and for a brief moment, it seemed like he was about to say something, but he only nodded. "I'll be watching," he said, his voice dropping low. "And if you fail, I won't be able to save you." The plan was simple, or at least, it seemed so. Sarah and Mark had only one objective: get into Windsor's building, retrieve the file, and get out. But the simplicity of the mission only masked the danger that lay ahead. Every step had to be precise, calculated. One mistake, and they wouldn't leave the building alive. The night was their ally. The dark hours offered cover, but they knew Windsor's security was tight. They couldn't afford to be caught. Every guard, every camera, every locked door was an obstacle that could make the difference between success and failure. Sarah adjusted the earpiece in her ear, listening to the faint whispers of instructions from the mysterious man who had set them on this path. His voice was calm, distant, like he was observing their every move from the shadows. 2 minutes until you reach the security desk," the man's voice said. "The guard will be distracted, but only for 30 seconds. Use that time wisely." Sarah looked at Mark. He was ready. His face was set in determination, though she could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He wasn't used to this kind of work. He was more comfortable with guns and confrontations. But this mission required subtlety, finesse, things that didn't come naturally to him. "Stay close," Sarah whispered, leading the way down the dimly lit hallway. They reached the security desk without incident. The guard, a heavy-set man in his late 40s, was slouched over his desk, eyes half-lidded as he scrolled through his phone. It was clear he wasn't expecting anyone to approach. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she moved past him, her steps light, barely making a sound. Mark followed closely behind, his eyes darting from side to side, ever on alert. The moment they passed the desk, Sarah reached for the keycard reader, tapping the small device the man had given them. The light turned green, and the door clicked open. "We're in," Sarah whispered. They slipped inside the building's interior, where the soft hum of machinery and air conditioning filled the silence. The layout was a maze of sterile offices and meeting rooms, all designed to look the same. Sharp, clean lines, devoid of personality. It felt more like a fortress than a corporate building. "Third door on the left," the voice on the earpiece said. "That's where the file is kept. You have 5 minutes before the next round of security checks. Move fast." Sarah and Mark moved through the maze, dodging the occasional passing employee who barely gave them a second glance. Sarah's mind raced. The closer they got to the office, the more she felt the weight of the danger pressing in on them. She couldn't shake the feeling that Windsor's people were already onto them, that they were being watched. They reached the door. Mark glanced at Sarah, his eyes searching for confirmation. She nodded, and together, they stepped into the room. The file was on a desk, locked in a secure drawer, the only item of interest in an otherwise empty space. The air smelled faintly of dust, and the faint glow of a computer screen illuminated the darkened room. Mark approached the desk, pulling out a small set of tools from his jacket pocket. Within seconds, the drawer was open. "There it is," Mark muttered, holding up the file. It was thick, heavy. More than just a collection of papers. It felt like it held the answers to everything they had been searching for. But just as Mark turned to hand it to Sarah, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Shit," Sarah hissed, her eyes widening with panic. They had no time to hide. Mark shoved the file into his bag and yanked Sarah towards the back door. They had to get out, and they had to do it fast. The footsteps grew louder, closer. They couldn't afford to be caught. They couldn't afford to fail. The back door was locked. Sarah cursed under her breath as she fumbled for the keycard. It wasn't working. The footsteps were almost at the door. "Come on," Mark urged, his voice frantic. He grabbed Sarah's wrist, pulling her towards the window. The only option left was to jump. With a final glance at the approaching guard, Sarah made her decision. She threw open the window and clambered out, followed closely by Mark. The drop wasn't far, but the alley below was narrow, and their landing wasn't as graceful as it could have been. They stumbled into the alley, hearts racing, adrenaline pumping. Sarah's head spun as she pulled herself to her feet. "We've got the file. Now we need to get out of here." Mark didn't answer. Instead, he looked back toward the building, his eyes narrowing as if he could sense something. It was the same feeling Sarah had, the sensation of being watched. "We need to move," Sarah urged, tugging at his arm, "before they figure out what happened." But as they turned to leave, the distant sound of sirens echoed through the alley. Their time was running out. The sirens were growing louder. The narrow alleyway seemed to close in around them as the distant wail of police cars echoed off the walls. They had to act fast. Sarah's mind raced, calculating every possible escape route, every option. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now, not after everything they had been through. "Where's the car?" Mark asked, his voice tense as he glanced over his shoulder. "It's a few blocks down," Sarah replied quickly, scanning the dark streets ahead. "But we need to make sure we're not followed." They both broke into a run, weaving through the winding alleyways and avoiding the occasional pedestrian who might give them away. The city streets were empty at this hour, but the sound of the approaching sirens was unmistakable. Every second felt like a lifetime. As they turned a corner, Sarah saw the familiar shape of their getaway car parked at the end of the street. It was a plain, unassuming sedan, nothing that would draw attention, but perfect for slipping through the shadows. "We're almost there," she said, her breath coming in quick bursts. "Keep moving." Just as they neared the car, a shadow loomed ahead. Sarah froze. There, standing between them and the car, was a figure. A man, tall and imposing, dressed in dark clothes. His eyes glowed in the dim light, and his posture was rigid, like he had been waiting for them. "Not so fast," the man said, his voice cold and menacing. Mark took a step forward, his hand moving toward the gun at his waist, but Sarah held up her hand to stop him. She knew this man. She had seen him before, though it was hard to place when. He wasn't one of Windsor's people, but he was just as dangerous. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, trying to keep her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. The man smiled, though it was more of a grimace. "Does it really matter? You've made a lot of enemies, Sarah. And now I'm here to collect." Mark's grip on his gun tightened, but Sarah shook her head. They couldn't afford to start a fight. "Not here, not now." "Move aside," she said, her voice hardening. "We're not here to cause trouble." The man took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "Trouble? You've already caused enough of it. I'm just the messenger." Sarah's mind raced. Who was this guy, and what did he want with them? The thought of turning back to the building was out of the question. They had the file. It was their only chance, their only leverage. But this man was standing in their way, and he wasn't backing down. "Listen," Sarah said, taking a deep breath. "We don't have time for this. You can have whatever you want, but we're leaving." The man laughed, low and dangerous. "It's not that simple. You think you're walking away from all this? From Windsor, from me? You're in deeper than you realize, Sarah." He stepped closer, his hand reaching into his coat. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to move, to act, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't afford to make the wrong move. Before either of them could react, a blinding light flooded the street. A police car had turned the corner, its headlights casting long shadows across the scene. The man froze, his eyes darting back and forth as if trying to decide whether to fight or flee. "You're not getting away this time," Sarah muttered under her breath. With a sudden movement, the man turned and bolted down the alley, disappearing into the shadows just as quickly as he had appeared. Sarah and Mark stood frozen for a moment, their breaths heavy in the cool night air. "Go, go, go!" Sarah shouted, pulling Mark toward the car. They didn't have time to waste. The police were close, and they needed to get out of there before everything came crashing down. They jumped into the car, and Sarah slammed the door behind them. Mark quickly started the engine, and they sped off into the night, the sound of sirens fading behind them. As they drove, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their problems were far from over. The man who had stopped them, he wasn't just some random player in all of this. He was connected to something bigger, something they hadn't yet fully understood. And he wouldn't be the last person to come after them. Mark glanced at her, his expression grim. Who was that guy? Sarah shook her head. I don't know. But I'm sure we'll find out soon enough. The road ahead was dark, but they had the file. They had the one thing that could change everything. And they weren't going to stop until they figured out just what it meant. The night felt heavy as the car sped down the empty streets. The cool air whipped through the cracks in the windows, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of suffocating heat building inside her. Mark's face was grim as he kept his eyes on the road, but his silence spoke volumes. Something wasn't right, and Sarah could feel it deep in her bones. Mark, Sarah said, her voice tight, who was that guy? And what did he mean by, I'm just the messenger? Mark didn't answer immediately. He kept his focus on the road, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. After a few long moments, he finally spoke, his voice low. Sarah. I think I know who he is. His name's Ryan Holt. He's part of something bigger, something we've been too deep in without realizing it. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of Ryan Holt before, but she hadn't expected to run into him. He was a shadowy figure, someone who operated behind the scenes, pulling strings for people like Windsor. But to hear Mark say it like this, it changed everything. He works for Windsor? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark shook his head. No. He's not working for Windsor. He's not working for anyone. He's a mercenary. A freelancer, but one who's always on the payroll of the highest bidder. And right now, it looks like he's been hired by someone we know very well. Sarah felt a cold chill run down her spine. Who? Mark's grip on the wheel tightened, his knuckles turning white. It's you, Sarah. You were always the target. Everything that's been happening, it's been about you. And whoever is pulling the strings wants that file. They'll stop at nothing to get it. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah couldn't breathe. She had always known that the stakes were high, but the revelation that she herself had been the target of a shadowy conspiracy sent a chill through her veins. The file wasn't just some piece of evidence. It was the key to something far bigger. We need to get to the safe house, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. Now. Mark nodded and pushed the car harder, swerving through the empty streets. He knew they didn't have much time. The authorities were still out there, and Ryan Holt wasn't the only one hunting them. They were in too deep now, and turning back wasn't an option. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the safe house. An old secluded cabin in the woods, far from the chaos of the city. The air was thick with tension as they pulled up to the cabin, the trees surrounding them casting long shadows in the moonlight. We're safe here for now, Mark said, cutting the engine. But Sarah wasn't so sure. She had a gut feeling that this place, no matter how hidden, wouldn't be enough to keep them safe for long. They got out of the car, and Mark quickly locked it behind them. The cabin looked abandoned, its wooden walls weathered from years of neglect, but it was secure. It had to be. We need to go over everything, Sarah said, walking up to the door. She pulled out the file they had fought so hard to get. It was still intact, still their only chance of survival. We can't afford to make any mistakes now. Mark nodded, his eyes darting around. You're right. But we can't trust anyone. Not anymore. They entered the cabin and locked the door behind them. The inside was bare, save for a few old chairs and a dusty table. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. Sarah spread out the file on the table and opened it. The contents inside were encrypted, the information locked behind layers of security. They couldn't just open it. They needed someone who could crack the code. And that someone was still miles away. Do you have the contact? Sarah asked, looking up at Mark. Mark hesitated for a moment before reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small, encrypted phone. He turned it on and handed it to her. You need to call him. He's the only one who can help us now. Sarah took the phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number. The phone rang several times before it was answered. Hello? A voice on the other end said. This is Sarah, she replied. We need your help. We've got the file, but we can't open it. We need you to decrypt it now. There was a pause, followed by a sigh. You're in deeper than you realize, Sarah. This isn't just about a file. It's about your past. And there are people who don't want you to know the truth. Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. What truth? The voice was quiet, almost conspiratorial. I can't say over the phone. The atmosphere inside the cabin grew tense as the night stretched on. They're far more dangerous than you think. Sarah and Mark sat across from each other. And you've just scratched the encrypted file still spread out on the table before them. Before she could say anything else, neither of them went dead. The weight of the situation pressing down on them both. Time was running out. Suddenly, the phone rang again. Sarah grabbed it immediately, her fingers trembling as she answered. The voice on the other end was the same, low and cautious. You're still alive, I see, the voice said, a hint of amusement in it. Did you think it would be that easy? Who are you? Sarah demanded, her voice cutting through the static. Why are you doing this? There was a pause on the line before the voice responded, almost too casually. Because you're the key to everything. The file, the information inside it, it's not just about taking down Windsor or even uncovering your past. It's much bigger than that, Sarah. You've been playing in a game much larger than you realize. Sarah's mind raced. Who are you really? The voice chuckled softly. I'm someone who has been pulling the strings for a long time. Someone who is tired of being in the shadows. And now, it's time for you to take your place in this game. Before Sarah could respond, the line went dead again. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Mark had been listening intently, and now he looked at her, his face etched with worry. Do you know who it is? Sarah nodded slowly, her expression hardening. It's the person I've been running from for years. The one who's been behind everything. The one who set all of this in motion. Mark's eyes widened. Who? Your father, Sarah said, the words coming out in a whisper. He's the one behind all of this. The reason Windsor and everything else happened. It was all him. Mark stared at her, his face pale. My father? But he's dead. That's what we've been led to believe, Sarah said, her voice thick with disbelief. But he's not. He's alive, and he's been orchestrating all of this from the shadows. Mark's mind was racing. He had always believed his father's death had been an accident, a simple car crash. But now to hear this, to learn the truth, it was almost too much to bear. No, Mark whispered, shaking his head. It can't be true. I'm sorry, Mark, Sarah said, her voice full of regret. But it's the truth. There was no time to dwell on the past. The danger was still out there, closing in on them. They needed to act quickly. We need to find him, Sarah said, standing up from the table. We need to finish this. Mark nodded grimly, his expression hardening. Let's end this. Once and for all. The cabin door slammed open suddenly, the sound of boots pounding the floor as men stormed inside. Before they could react, Mark and Sarah were grabbed, restrained, and forced to the ground. Ryan Holt stepped into the room, a smirk on his face. You thought you could hide? He sneered, looking down at them. The game is over. But Sarah wasn't afraid. She had nothing left to lose. I won't let you win, she said, her voice cold with determination. With a quick movement, she managed to break free, her training kicking in. In the chaos, she grabbed the file and ran toward the back of the cabin, Mark following close behind. But the men were fast, closing in on them from all sides. Just as they reached the edge of the woods, a loud crash echoed behind them. The sound of engines revving filled the air, and suddenly, a car tore through the trees, headlights blazing. It was their contact, the person who had helped them all along. He had arrived just in time. Mark and Sarah jumped into the car, and without a moment to spare, they sped off into the night, leaving the cabin and the past behind them. They didn't know where they were headed. All they knew was that they couldn't stop now. The world was still full of secrets, and their fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, they felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were ready to face it, together.